I'm Jason, 29 years old. If someone had told me a decade ago where I'd be now, I'd have thought they were joking. Coming from a humble background and finding success in finance seemed like an unattainable dream. Yet here I am, based in Philadelphia, working for one of the most esteemed firms in the field. In just 6 years, I've achieved a reputation that many spend their entire careers chasing. The journey has been far from easy. Long nights, relentless pressure, and constant oversight are part of the job. But to me, it's always been worth the effort. Every deal I've closed and every milestone I've hit has been driven by a deep-seated desire to prove myself, to my family and maybe even to myself, that I am more than they ever thought I could be. Growing up, my family was close-knit, but more out of necessity than affection, like a team sticking together under pressure. My parents, Richard and Linda, treated my older brother Eric and me very differently. Eric, 5 years older, was their golden boy. No matter what he did, they'd justify it. Bad grades? The teacher was at fault. Skipping class? He was too smart for dull lessons. Even when he did the bare minimum, they'd celebrate him like he'd achieved greatness. For me, it was the opposite. I worked tirelessly to earn straight A's, but all I got were warnings not to be arrogant or reminders that I was only as good as my latest report card. Any mistake I made led to lectures about responsibility and how I needed to set an example for Eric or work harder if I wanted to succeed in life. That double standard shaped my perspective on the world. I've always been competitive, but not in the way Eric is. He excels by putting others down, while I've focused on lifting myself up. Perhaps that's why I found success early in my career. The rejection and indifference at home toughened me and sharpened my focus, though it also made me feel like an outsider within my own family. The tension came to a head last Thanksgiving. After finishing a grueling quarter at work, I looked forward to unwinding, even if it meant enduring family dynamics. As usual, Eric was there, lounging on the couch with a beer, while my parents doted on him. During dinner, he smirked and asked, "So, Jason, how's the corporate grind? Still crunching numbers and sucking souls?" The room erupted in laughter, including my parents. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't bother me, but it did. It wasn't just the comment, it was the way everyone joined in, treating it as though mocking my hard-earned achievements was acceptable. Later that evening, Eric cornered me in the kitchen. "Hear about the layoffs at your firm?" he asked too casually. Worried? At the time, I wasn't. My position felt secure. I brushed off his question, but something about it lingered. How did he know about the layoffs? It wasn't public information, and I hadn't mentioned it to my family. Over the following weeks, things at work started to unravel. Emails I'd sent seemed to disappear. Meetings I was supposed to attend were rescheduled without my knowledge. My coworkers began acting distant, polite but detached, as though they knew something I didn't. Initially, I chalked it up to office politics. Finance is notorious for its cutthroat environment. But then, things escalated. I'd been eyeing a promotion for months, and my boss, Michelle, had hinted that I was the leading candidate. I'd gone above and beyond, taking on extra projects and mentoring new hires. Yet, out of the blue, the promotion went to someone else. When I asked Michelle for feedback, she avoided eye contact. "There were concerns about your professionalism," she said. "Specifically, a rumor that you'd been speaking negatively about colleagues to clients." I was floored. I'd never badmouthed anyone, let alone to a client. When I pressed her for details, she shut me down. "The decision's been made. Let's focus on moving forward." But how could I move forward when my reputation had been tarnished? After that, paranoia set in. These incidents couldn't be random. Someone was targeting me, but I couldn't figure out who or why. I started scrutinizing everything: emails, meetings, even casual conversations. But the harder I searched for answers, the more elusive they became. Eric's strange comment at Thanksgiving replayed in my mind. It seemed ridiculous to think he had anything to do with my work troubles. He didn't know anything about my industry. Yet, every time I saw him, he'd drop hints about my job, sharing specific details he shouldn't have known. At Christmas, he mentioned a new tech client my firm had signed, a deal I'd only learned about in a confidential meeting the day before. When I asked how he knew, he smirked. "Read it online," he said. Meanwhile, Eric's life seemed to take a dramatic turn. He started wearing designer clothes and talking about a planned trip to Greece. This was a guy who'd never held a job for more than 6 months. Where was the money coming from? "Looks like someone hit the jackpot," I joked at a family dinner. Eric's expression darkened. "I've been saving," he snapped defensively. "Not that it's any of your business." My parents, of course, leapt to his defense. "He's finally turning his life around," my mom said, beaming. "You should be happy for him." Happy? I didn't know what I felt. Uneasy? Maybe suspicious? But mostly like an outsider again, watching a play where everyone else knew their roles except me. The final straw came one quiet evening at home. Sorting through my emails, I found one in my junk folder. It looked like spam, poorly written, full of vague phrases about mutual benefits and confidential dealings. But one line stopped me cold. "Your brother's agreement with our firm has been most beneficial." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It didn't make sense. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate. Somehow, Eric was at the center of it all. That night, it became clear I couldn't overlook the signs any longer. Someone was trying to destroy everything I'd built, and if I didn't act quickly, they'd succeed. I had to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost me. After discovering that email, I barely slept. My mind was a storm of anger, confusion, and doubt. Could Eric really be behind this? If he was, why? What could he gain by tearing me down? And even more troubling, was he acting alone? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I started by meticulously reviewing every email, document, and message stored on my work laptop. Most of it was standard: client updates, internal communications, and meeting summaries. However, a few items stood out, including emails I didn't recall writing, phrased in ways I would never use. One email in particular grabbed my attention. It was addressed to a client and contained a line criticizing unprofessional colleagues. That wasn't me. I printed it out, along with anything else that seemed suspicious, and tucked the papers away. If someone was pretending to be me, I needed concrete evidence to defend myself. Even as I tried to concentrate on my job, I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I needed weren't at work. They were with my family. That weekend, I visited my parents, pretending I was there to help them with their sluggish computer. I didn't go there intending to snoop. I just wanted to see if anything seemed unusual. My parents were terrible with technology, so I figured they wouldn't notice if I looked around a little. While browsing their laptop, I stumbled upon something unexpected: a shared bank statement left open in a browser tab. I wasn't trying to pry, but the details caught my eye. There were regular transactions labeled Support Fund being sent directly to Eric's account. Large sums, thousands of dollars each month. "Hey, what's this?" I asked, keeping my tone light. My dad, busy making tea in the kitchen, glanced over. "Oh, just a little help for your brother," he said casually. "You know he's been struggling. We're just giving him a bit of a boost." A bit of a boost? That so-called boost was more than I earned in a month when I started my career. "Must be nice," I muttered, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. My mom shot me one of her trademark disapproving looks. "Don't start, Jason. He's had a hard time, and we're just trying to even things out. Even things out? That phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. My entire life, my parents had treated Eric's failures as hurdles to overcome, while dismissing my achievements as luck or arrogance. Now, they were literally paying him to catch up to me. I left their house that day more convinced than ever that Eric was involved in the issues at my job. The timing of those payments was too coincidental to ignore. They'd started just months before the trouble at work began. But I needed proof. The following morning, I hired a private investigator. It felt extreme, maybe even paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being deliberately targeted. If Eric was behind this, I needed more than just suspicions to confront him, or to protect myself. The investigator worked quickly. Within a week, they uncovered something that left me in shock. Eric had been sending emails to one of my firm's competitors, providing detailed information about our projects and clients. But the worst part? He had written the emails as if they were from me. I was in disbelief. My own brother had gone out of his way to sabotage me, framing me as the source of the leaks. Armed with this evidence, I decided it was time to confront him directly. I went to his apartment without warning, my heart pounding as I knocked on the door. He answered wearing sweatpants and an expensive hoodie, a glass of wine in hand, looking completely carefree. "Jason," he said, with that smug grin I'd grown to despise. "What brings you here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him into the living room without waiting for an invitation. He followed, still smiling. "What's up? You look stressed," he said. I took a deep breath and pulled out the printed emails. "Care to explain these?" His grin faltered briefly, but quickly returned. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "You've been sending confidential information to a competitor," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "And you've been pretending to be me while doing it. Don't bother denying it. I have proof." Eric laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "You've lost it," he said. "Seriously, Jason, you're working too hard. Maybe take a vacation or something." "Don't play games with me," I snapped. "I know what you've done, and I'm not letting you get away with it." His expression shifted then, the smugness melting into something darker. "You always think you're better than me," he said quietly, setting his glass down. "Always the golden boy, always ahead. Maybe I just wanted to show you what it feels like to lose for once." I stared at him, stunned. I had expected denial, excuses, anything but this. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "You're still standing, aren't you? What's the big deal?" The anger bubbling inside me threatened to boil over, but I held it back. "This isn't over," I said, turning to leave. "Oh, I think it is," he called after me. But he was wrong. That night, I decided it was time to confront my parents. They had to know something. After all, they'd been sending Eric money for months. When I brought up the bank transfers during a family dinner, their reaction was immediate and defensive. "We're just helping him get back on track," my mom said. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "And what about the emails he's been sending?" I countered, slamming the printed documents onto the table. "You're telling me you had no idea he was sabotaging me at work?" My dad's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Eric wouldn't do something like that," he said firmly. "Then explain this," I said, pointing to the evidence. The room went silent as my parents exchanged a telling glance. It was obvious they were hiding something. "You're imagining things," my mom finally said. "You've been under a lot of stress lately, Jason. Maybe you should take a break." Their dismissal stung like a slap. Not only were they ignoring the evidence, but they were also protecting Eric. I left their house feeling more isolated than ever. But if they thought I'd back down, they clearly didn't know me. After the disastrous showdown with Eric and my failed attempt to reason with my parents, There was no turning back. The family dynamic I'd spent my whole life navigating had officially fallen apart. All I had left was my resolve to uncover the entire truth. The findings from the private investigator gave me a solid starting point. Eric hadn't just sent emails to a competitor. He'd pretended to be me to do it. And despite their denials, my parents were actively supporting his lifestyle. What I didn't yet understand was how deep this betrayal ran, or how far they were willing to go. That week, the situation at work worsened. My boss, Michelle, called me into her office for yet another uncomfortable conversation. "We've received another complaint," she said hesitantly. "What now?" I asked, struggling to hide my frustration. "This time, it's about a leak," she replied. "Someone has accused you of sharing sensitive information with a competitor." My stomach dropped. It was exactly what Eric had been doing, but now the blame was falling squarely on me. "I didn't do it," I said firmly. "I don't know who's spreading these lies, but I can prove I'm innocent." Michelle studied me for a long moment. "Jason, I believe you," she finally said, "but these are serious accusations. If we can't get to the bottom of this, your position could be in jeopardy." That was the moment I realized I couldn't just play defense anymore. Whoever was targeting me, Eric, my parents, or both, wasn't going to stop until I was completely destroyed. I needed to go on the offensive. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A few days after my meeting with Michelle, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Samantha, Eric's ex-girlfriend. Her message was brief, but intriguing. "I think I have information that might help you. Can we talk?" I was skeptical at first. Samantha and Eric had broken up years ago, and as far as I knew, they hadn't been in contact since. But the timing was too coincidental to ignore. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her apartment. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, nervously fidgeting with her phone. "Thanks for coming," she said with a tentative smile. "Thanks for reaching out," I replied. "What's this about?" She took a deep breath before diving into her story. Apparently, when she and Eric were together, he'd often vent about me. He'd complained about always being overshadowed by my achievements and how our parents had treated us differently, expecting him to fail while pushing me to excel. "He always felt like he had something to prove," she said, sipping her coffee. "But I didn't realize how far he'd go until recently." Samantha explained that a mutual friend had mentioned Eric bragging about finally taking Jason down a notch. At first, she thought it was just empty talk. But after revisiting some old messages, she discovered something alarming. Screenshots of texts between Eric and my parents discussing ways to undermine me at work. "I don't know all the details," she said, handing me her phone, "but it seems like your parents were more involved than you think." The screenshots were damning. In one text, my dad suggested timing Eric's leaks to coincide with major projects at my company to cause maximum damage. In another, my mom expressed concern that I might figure out what was happening and urged Eric to be more careful. Reading those messages hit me like a freight train. It was one thing to suspect Eric of sabotaging me, but seeing my parents actively conspiring against me was devastating. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, struggling to process everything. Samantha shrugged. "Eric's hurt a lot of people, including me. I guess I just wanted to do the right thing for once." With Samantha's help, I finally had the evidence I needed to confront my parents again. This time, I wasn't going to let them dismiss me. The opportunity came during an unplanned visit to their house. I showed up unannounced, catching them off guard. My mom was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, and my dad was watching TV in the living room. "We need to talk," I said, setting my bag on the counter. My mom sighed. "Jason, if this is about Eric again—" "It is," I interrupted, pulling out the screenshots. "And this time, I have proof." I handed the documents to my dad, who frowned as he read through them. My mom peered over his shoulder, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Where did you get these?" she demanded. "That doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that you've been lying to me. You've been funding Eric's sabotage and helping him ruin my career." My dad set the papers down, crossing his arms defensively. "It's not what you think," he said. "Oh, really? Then what is it?" I shot back. My mom opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Don't even try to justify this," I said. "You've been working against me for months, maybe years, and for what? To make Eric feel better about himself?" "Jason, calm down," my dad began, but I wasn't about to let this go. My dad said, "We were just trying to help your brother. He's been struggling." "And?" I demanded. "You thought ruining my life was the best way to help him?" My mom's eyes welled up with tears. "We never meant for it to go this far," she said. "We just wanted to even the playing field." There it was again, that phrase. "You've been saying that my whole life," I said, my voice trembling. "But this isn't about fairness. It's about enabling Eric at my expense. I'm done being the scapegoat for this family." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. That night, I compiled everything I had: the screenshots, emails, and the private investigator's report, and sent it all to my lawyer. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't let them get away with this. The fallout began almost immediately. My parents called me the next day, pleading with me to reconsider. They insisted their actions came from a place of love and that they never intended to hurt me. Their excuses felt hollow. I hung up and blocked their numbers. Eric, meanwhile, bombarded me with messages ranging from sarcastic digs to outright threats. "You think you're so perfect," one read. Another simply warned, "Watch your back." It was clear things would get worse before they improved, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. The truth was out, and I was determined to get justice. After my confrontation with my parents, everything started unraveling. They had always seemed like the foundation of our family, or so I thought. But now their choices were catching up to them. As I focused on gathering evidence and protecting myself, their carefully maintained image of being a loving, respectable family began to fall apart. At work, I took action. Armed with the evidence I'd collected, the emails, screenshots, and investigator's report, I scheduled a meeting with Michelle, my boss. This time, I didn't hold anything back. Sitting across from her, I laid everything on the table. The emails Eric had sent pretending to be me, proof of his communication with our competitor, and even evidence linking my parents to his scheme. As I explained each piece, Michelle's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "This is incredible," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Jason, why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" "I didn't realize how far it went until now," I admitted. "I didn't want to make accusations without proof, but now that I have it, I need to clear my name." Michelle nodded and picked up one of the documents. "This changes everything," she said. "We'll start an internal investigation immediately. In the meantime, I'll make sure the accusations against you are dismissed." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't over yet, but at least I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Word spread quickly through the office. Colleagues who had been distant started reaching out, apologizing for believing the rumors. One even admitted overhearing whispers about Eric's involvement, but hadn't known how to address it. "People were scared," they said. "No one wanted to get caught in the middle. But now that we know the truth, we're behind you." Their support meant more to me than I could express, and strengthened my resolve to see this through to the end. While things began to improve at work, my family's situation spiraled further out of control. One evening, I received a call from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Jason, I don't know how to say this," she began hesitantly, "but there's a lot of talk in the family about you and your parents." "Talk?" I asked. already bracing for the worst. Apparently, your parents are telling everyone you're overreacting and trying to tear the family apart for no reason, she explained. They're making themselves out to be the victims, saying they only wanted to help Eric and that you've blown it all out of proportion. Hearing this made my blood boil. Of course, my parents were trying to twist the narrative in their favor. It was typical Richard and Linda: deny, deflect, and play the victims. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, "but I'm done caring what they think. The truth will come out soon enough." It didn't take long for that truth to ripple through the family. The investigator uncovered even more damning evidence, not just against Eric, but also exposing my parents' broader financial misconduct. They hadn't just been funneling money to Eric. They'd been siphoning funds from a shared inheritance account for years, using the money for personal expenses and to support Eric's sabotage. The findings were significant enough to justify legal action. With my lawyer's help, I filed a defamation lawsuit against Eric and began proceedings to recover the stolen funds from my parents. This wasn't just about the money, it was about holding them accountable for their actions. The backlash from my parents was immediate. They called me, begging me to drop the lawsuit. "We're family," my mom said, her voice shaking. "You can't do this to us." "You should have thought of that before trying to ruin my life," I replied, my tone icy. My dad took a different tactic, threatening to cut me out of their will if I didn't back down. I almost laughed. "You've already stolen from me," I said. "What's left to lose?" As the legal process unfolded, their standing in the community crumbled. News of their financial misconduct and involvement in the sabotage began to spread within their social circle, thanks in part to a local news outlet that covered the story. My parents, once respected figures in the community, quickly became pariahs. My dad stepped down from his position on the neighborhood association board, and my mom stopped attending her weekly book club. They withdrew from public life, retreating into the isolation of their home. Eric's life, too, was unraveling. His employer discovered his role in the scheme and launched an investigation of their own. It didn't take long for them to find that he had been using company resources to aid his efforts against me. He was fired immediately, leaving him without a stable income to support the lifestyle he had flaunted for so long. Mutual acquaintances shared that he was struggling to make ends meet, applying for jobs but being rejected at every turn. His once flashy wardrobe and extravagant trips were replaced by a desperate fight to stay afloat. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction watching him face the consequences of his choices. But another part of me felt nothing at all. He had made his decisions, and now he had to live with them. Throughout this ordeal, I found support in places I hadn't expected. Cousins I hadn't been close to reached out, offering encouragement and sharing their own experiences of feeling overlooked or dismissed by my parents. Friends rallied around me, inviting me to join their families for holidays and reminding me that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. The restitution payments from Eric and my parents provided an unexpected financial buffer, allowing me to rebuild my life and look ahead. It wasn't about the money. It was about ensuring they couldn't walk away from this unscathed. At work, things began to improve dramatically. Michelle and the leadership team recognized my resilience throughout the ordeal and offered me a promotion, a leadership role that solidified my standing in the company. It was a moment of validation, proof that no matter how hard they had tried to tear me down, I had emerged stronger. My parents made one last attempt to reconcile. They showed up at my apartment without warning, looking older and more worn than I'd ever seen them. "We're sorry, Jason," my mom said, tears streaming down her face. "We just want our family back." I looked at them for a long time before responding. "You lost your family the moment you chose to betray me," I said. "This isn't something an apology can fix." Then I shut the door, leaving them standing on the doorstep. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a necessary one. With my career back on track and my parents' influence finally out of my life, I felt like I was free for the first time in years. I didn't know what the future held, but for once, I wasn't afraid to find out. Leaving behind the wreckage of my family felt like shedding a suffocating weight. For years, I had carried the burden of their expectations, manipulations, and betrayals. But now, with the lawsuits resolved and the truth fully exposed, I had no reason to look back. I moved to a new city, Boston, where the bustling, vibrant streets offered a fresh start, far from the gossip and whispers of my past. The position I accepted at a prestigious financial firm wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to redefine myself in a place where no one knew my history. Starting over was daunting. Even though my reputation had been restored, the scars of the experience lingered. I found myself questioning people's motives, always wondering if another betrayal was around the corner. But as I settled into my new life, I began meeting people who helped me rebuild trust, piece by piece. One of my first new friends was Mark, a colleague who had recently transferred from New York. He had a knack for noticing when someone was struggling. Over coffee one day, he asked, "Why do you always seem so guarded?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something about his sincerity made me open up. "It's a long story," I said, staring into my cup. "Let's just say my family situation is complicated." Mark nodded without pushing further. "Complicated or not, you've got people here who have your back now. Just remember that." His words stayed with me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I began to believe that I didn't have to face everything alone. Professionally, things were better than I'd imagined. My leadership role at the firm gave me chances to excel in ways I hadn't before. I led projects that gained national attention, and within a year, I was featured in an industry magazine as one of Boston's rising stars. Seeing my name associated with something positive felt surreal after everything my family had done to tarnish my reputation. This wasn't just a victory. It was a reclaiming of my identity. Meanwhile, back home, the consequences of my parents' and Eric's actions continued to ripple through their lives. I learned through mutual acquaintances that my parents had sold their house and moved into a modest apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. The financial fraud charges had left them drained, both economically and socially. "They're not the same," a distant cousin told me during a phone call. "Your mom hardly leaves the house anymore, and your dad isn't involved in any of his old committees. It's like they've disappeared." Hearing about their downfall brought no satisfaction, only a cold sense of detachment. They had made their decisions, and now they were living with the consequences. Eric wasn't faring any better. His reputation was ruined, and his name had become a cautionary tale in professional circles. He had burned through what little savings he had left, and was reportedly living paycheck to paycheck. The last I heard, he'd taken a job at a small firm outside Philadelphia, far removed from the industry he had once aspired to dominate. Despite their struggles, my parents and Eric continued to reach out to me. Letters and emails trickled in sporadically, each one filled with apologies that felt more self-serving than genuine. "We miss you," one letter from my mom read. "We made mistakes, but families forgive each other. It's time to move past this." I never replied. There was no moving past it. What they had done wasn't a simple misstep. It was a calculated betrayal that nearly destroyed me. Forgiving them would have meant erasing the pain they caused, and I couldn't do that. Meanwhile, my own life was thriving. I joined local groups and began volunteering with a mentorship program for young professionals. Giving back reminded me of the purpose behind my hard work, not just to succeed, but to create opportunities for others. One of the most meaningful moments came during a panel discussion at an industry conference where I had been invited to speak about overcoming challenges. Standing on the stage, looking out at the audience, I shared parts of my journey. Not the messy family drama, but the lessons I'd learned about perseverance and integrity. Afterward, A young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story really hit home for me," she said. "I've been going through something similar with my family, and hearing you talk about setting boundaries made me realize it's okay to put myself first." Her words brought a lump to my throat. If sharing my experiences could help someone else find their strength, then maybe the pain I had endured hadn't been in vain. Eventually, the restitution payments from Eric and my parents stopped. Not because I forgave the debt, but because they simply couldn't pay anymore. My lawyer suggested pursuing further legal action, but I declined. I didn't need their money. I was rebuilding my life on my own terms. As time passed, I found peace in the distance I had established from my family. My new circle of friends became my chosen family. People who supported and uplifted me instead of tearing me down. Holidays were spent with them, filled with laughter and warmth, the kind of joy that had been absent from my childhood. One day, while unpacking boxes in my new apartment, I came across an old photo album my mom had given me years ago. Flipping through the pages, I saw pictures of a younger me smiling beside Eric at birthdays and on family vacations. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different person, a version of myself who hadn't yet learned what family could truly mean. I closed the album and placed it back in the box. Those moments were part of my past, but they didn't define my future. The final piece of closure came when a distant relative sent me a letter. She had read about my story in the news and wanted to share her own struggles with a toxic family. "I felt trapped for so long," she wrote, "but seeing how you stood up for yourself has given me the courage to do the same. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to start over." Her words stayed with me. They reminded me that the pain and betrayal I had endured weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of something new.